We're at Woodland Waters today and I want to try and bust some myths when it comes to fishing the slider. When you're faced with sort of 16 to 20 foot of water as I am today, people naturally tend to reach for the feeder rod. Well, that means that they could be missing out on many fish in the different water columns. So what I'm going to do is give you 5 top tips. Tip 1, the float that I'm using today takes 5 AAA in weight. First of all, it's important that when you use a float that it's got some sort of base weight in it, because when you're casting, you need to make sure that the float is following your bulk of shot as well. Otherwise, it's going to be flapping about in the air. Now, I've got a number of shot just below the float here, but I've not just stuck on 5 AAAs. That makes it unaerodynamic. So what I've done is I've put 3 AAAs, 2 BBs, and then a number 4 trimming shot. That gives a length of weights, which means it's less chance of tangling. Another area as well, what I would urge you to do is make sure that all the slots in your shot are all aligned. Again, it just makes it a lot more aerodynamic. Tip 2, we're now going into the mechanics of the slider rig. My second tip is to use a rubber bead just behind the float. Talking of the mechanics of the rig, the clue is in the name, the sliding float. Essentially what we're going to do to fish this deep water is this bulk of shot or an olivette, which we discussed in tip 1, is going to pull the line through the float or slide through the float, hence the name, the slider. What's then going to happen is as that bulk is falling through the water, the float's going to twist and turn as that line is pulling through and sinking to the bottom. The float is then going to trap against what we call a stop knot. So tip 3, continuing with the mechanics of the rig, it's really important that we now talk about the stop knot. The stop knot essentially today, in fishing around 16.5 foot of water, is set at 16 foot deep. 16 foot from this point here down to my hook. And what's going to happen is when you cast out, that bulk of shot that I've just discussed is going to sink towards the bottom. Your line is going to be twisting and turning through the eye of your float, and eventually your float is going to meet this stop knot and trap. And that's when the weight will register and your float will then cock. So it's really important. Now, if you just tied a normal standard knot on your line, you're going to find it very difficult to cast out. It's going to get trapped in the rings of the rod. So on the stop knot, it's important that you leave what we call tag ends. They must be at least an inch and a half long, and that will enable the stop knot to fly through the rings of your rod when you're casting out. So very important. And actually tying the stop knot couldn't be any simpler. So I'm going to do that for you just now. You can use just your standard line that you've got on your reel. Today I'm using 4-pound line. Sometimes a good idea though is to use a line slightly thicker than what's on your reel line, so perhaps 5 or 6 pound. So to demonstrate that, I've got some 6-pound line just here that I'm going to add on to my 4-pound line. And to tie the stop knot is very simple. You need a length probably 10 inches long, and you're going to put the 2 ends together to form a loop. What you then do is you put the loop alongside your main line just here. So what you've got is a loop sat alongside your main line. Hold the loop with your dominant hand. For me, I'm right-handed. Take one of the tag ends and leave it alongside your main line. With the loose tag end that we can see here, we're going to take that and we're going to pass it over the other tag end and your main line 4 times. And then when we take that, after 4 turns, we pass it back through the loop which we had before. And then when we pull that tight, a little bit of moisture, it creates what we call the sliding stop knot. Now that can slide up and down my line as need be. So as we're plumbing the depth, we might need to keep adjusting this until we find the correct depth, which is then we'll pull these 2 tag ends tight, and we will trim, as I've just discussed, the tag ends to around 1.5 inches in length. That is how to tie a stop knot. I forgot something. We just spoke about stop knots, really important one for you. Just behind the stop knot that we've tied, when we've plumbed and we settled, we're going to use a black marker pen and we're just going to mark the line behind where the stop knot is. 2 reasons. First of all, it actually stops your stop knot sliding up, but if it does slip and happens to go 2 or 3 foot beyond where it should be, we've got that marker to bring it back to our original starting point. Tip 4 is about the general setup that we are fishing with. Essentially, when does the slider come into play? It comes into play when the depth of the swim is beyond the length of the rod that you're going to use. So if you're, for example, got a 10-foot waggler rod and the swim that you're looking to fish is 12 foot, slider would be perfect. Today, I use a standard 13-foot 3-piece waggler rod. Not expensive. It's a nice, simple Leader Concept GT rod. This will catch everything from 1 ounce roach up to 10-pound carp. I tend to stick to 4-pound line. It means that it slides, that the float slides nice and easy up that line. And to be honest, that will handle everything I'm targeting today. I'm targeting small silverfish with the odd bonus bream. When it comes to reels, that's a 3,000 size. And I think that's important. If you go anything below that, if you start using particularly heavy floats, I mean, this is a 5 AAA float. Anything above that for a more punchier cast, you might even want to go up to a 4,000 size. So I'd say minimum 3,000 reel, maybe even up to 4,000 if you're casting at any sort of distance. In terms of comfort, I think it's important that you have a rod rest. I also use a butt rest on my seat box. That way I can concentrate on what's going on in front of me. And because I'm going to be regularly feeding small balls of ground bait, I want to have my hands free. So it needs to be close by. Now, in terms of casting, we're going to cast slightly different than we would do if we was fishing a fixed waggler on the line. We're actually casting the bulk weight that we're using to slide through the line. So we're going to be a bit more what I describe as punchier. So a little bit more line between the end of the rod and the float than you normally would have. When you come behind your shoulder, we're going to just punch that float and we're going to trap the line and feather the line. That's important because we need the bait and any dropper shot to go beyond the float to avoid any tangles. We then put the rod under the surface and we allow the line to peel off the reel as that bulk weight is sinking through the water. Tip 5, feeding. Now if we think about what most people would do on a venue like this, fishing a feeder, whether it be an open end feeder or a block end feeder, we're delivering a parcel of bait every time you cast out. Well, how do we do that when we're fishing the sliding float? The key is ground bait. Little small balls of ground bait on a regular basis. It's important that you have a sticky ground bait mix so that when it lands on the surface it doesn't break up. It also stays intact to get down to the bottom as well in that 16 foot of water. I use a dedicated ground bait catapult to enable me to do this. And what we're going to do, it takes some practice, but you'll get used to it by simply using your catapult and feeding these regularly to ensure that we're attracting fish from far and wide. Actually, we're not quite done yet. I have got another bonus tip for you. So it's all about plumbing the depth. Really, really important. You're going to get lots of people asking us questions about how we plumb 25, 30, 40 meters into the lake. My tip is to utilize the weight of the float. So in this instance today, it takes 5 AAAs. When I cast out into the lake and I'm off the bottom with 5 AAAs, it's going to take my float down to a little bit of a pinprick. However, if any of those shot touch the bottom, of course it's going to show more of my float because it's not registering on the float. So what I do is I pinch 4 AAAs on my line about 2 foot from the hook. I then place 2 BBs, which is equivalent to a AAA, just above my hook length. I cast out, and if my float goes down to a little pinprick, I know that all the shot are registering on the float. However, if I keep adjusting the depth and add some more to the stop knot, as soon as those 2 BBs touch the bottom, more of my bristle is going to show. So I know that those 2 BBs are on the bottom. So I then adjust the stop knot just so a pinprick is showing once again. That means that those 2 BBs are just off the bottom. I can then replace those BBs with however I want to configure the bottom of my rig. Maybe you want a slower fall, so you want some number 6s or number 4s. But essentially, you're utilizing the weight of your float rather than a traditional plummet, because that's the easiest way to work out how deep it is and to where to set your stop knot.